Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Willis, and welcome back to You Will Love AP Gov. Thanks for joining me for another video on one of the required foundational documents for AP US Government. In this video, we're going to explore Federalist No. 51, an essay written by James Madison that lays the groundwork for understanding the system of separation of powers and checks and balances in the US Constitution. If you're taking notes for your AP class or prepping for the AP exam, remember to click on the link below and download the free guided notebook page to make it easier to follow along. Let's dive in. Madison's main argument in Federalist No. 51 is that the separation of powers laid out in the Constitution is an effective safeguard that will prevent any one branch of government from becoming too powerful and using that power to establish tyranny in America. Madison makes several key points to support his argument. First, because people are not perfect and can act in their own self-interest, government must be put into place to control human flaws and protect the rights of the minority from a tyranny of the majority. Second, because the government itself is made up of men who have a natural tendency to act in their own self-interest, safeguards must be put into place to limit the power of government and reduce the potential for the abuse of power. Third, that the best way of limiting the government's power is to divide the power of government among several co-equal branches and create a system of internal checks where each branch of government would have enough power to check and balance the others. Fourth, that to further limit the power of government, the new Constitution establishes a double security under a system of federalism, where the federal government shares power with the individual state governments. Let's take a look at how Madison presents his argument by analyzing some of the most famous quotes from the document and how you can interpret these quotes in an FRQ or essay. Madison begins Federalist No. 51 by making his belief in human nature plain. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Madison understood that because people can be bad when left to their own devices, a government is absolutely necessary in order to put rules in place and make laws that keep the people from hurting each other. However, for Madison and other members of the Constitutional Convention, especially the Anti-Federalists, the main question that needed to be answered was, how do we create a new government that is powerful enough to protect the rights of citizens, while at the same time limiting the power of the government to prevent it from trampling on those same rights? In Federalist No. 51, Madison poses that exact question to the reader. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Madison's solution was to divide the power of government amongst several co-equal branches and create a system of internal checks where each branch of government, executive, legislative, and judicial, would have enough power to check and balance the others. This system of checks and balances would ensure that no one branch or individual could dominate the government and threaten individual freedoms. For Madison, that was the key to preventing tyranny. The remainder of Federalist No. 51 is a blueprint of how to divide the government's power equally and establish a system of checks and balances. Madison begins by writing, in order to lay a due foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, which, to a certain extent, is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty, it is evident that each department should have a will of its own, and consequently should be so constituted that the members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others. For Madison, the first step in creating a system of checks and balances is to ensure that each branch of the government is separate and co-equal with each other. No one branch would be more important, and each branch would have its own unique roles, powers, and responsibilities that wouldn't overlap with the others nor obstruct the other branch's ability to do their jobs. The independency of each branch allows each branch to be an honest watchdog over the others, making sure no branch oversteps its proper authority. However, Madison goes on to write, in Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. Here, Madison acknowledges that, in the newly proposed Constitution, the legislative branch of the federal government has been granted extensive power and responsibility beyond that of the executive and judicial branches, as is evident by the length of Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, as compared to the brevity of Articles 2 and 3. But he also acknowledges the fact that, in a true republic, the Congress should have the most power, since it's the one branch that directly represents the people. So, given this fact, how do we allow the Congress to hold such responsibility as it logically should, but at the same time, maintain equal power between the branches? Madison offers a solution. The remedy for this inconveniency is to divide the legislature into different branches, and to render them, by different modes of election and different principles of action, as little connected with each other as the nature of their common functions and their common dependence on society will admit. Madison is saying that the second step in creating a system of checks and balances is to divide the Congress into two separate houses and form a bicameral legislature where each house has its own unique powers and responsibilities, like each of the three branches of government themselves. This would dilute the enormous power of the legislative branch and make it more difficult for the Congress to wield its enormous power to dominate the executive and judicial branches. That's exactly what we have today with the Senate and the House of Representatives, with each house holding unique powers and having the ability to check the other house. And just in case there are still any doubters out there, Madison attempts to convince them once and for all by reminding them that, in the compound Republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. Madison is assuring the citizens that if they're still not sold on the separation of powers in the new Constitution, the power of the federal government is diluted even further by the system of federalism. Under this system, the power of government is divided between the federal government and the individual state governments, putting even further limits on what the federal government can and cannot do. For example, the federal government is prohibited from interfering in state elections, changing laws pertaining to state taxes, regulating marriage, or changing education law within the states. Fast forward to today, and the core principles in Federalist No. 51 remain as essential as ever. Despite the enormous expansion of federal power to meet the needs of modern times, we see the system of checks and balances in action every day. For example, both houses of Congress can pass a bill, but the president can veto the bill to prevent it from becoming law. The president can issue an executive order, but the federal courts can rule on the constitutionality of the order. The president can nominate a new justice to the Supreme Court, but that nominee must be approved by the Senate in order to be confirmed. In Madison's words, in order for the system of checks and balances to function, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. As long as each branch of the federal government fulfills its responsibilities and roles laid out in the Constitution, the competition between the interests of the separate branches will prevent any one branch from dominating the lawmaking process and establishing tyranny in America. And that's everything you need to know about Federalist No. 51. You can click here for additional videos for AP US Government, and be sure to check out my videos on AP Macroeconomics and AP Microeconomics as well. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content on AP Government and Economics. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on You Will Love AP Gov.